Good evening, everybody. We're starting to, it's a minute or so before the hour, we're starting to let people into the Zoom. You know, the setup for the Thursday night Careers Life in Yale programs are allowing for good, you know, sort of conversation, interaction with our guests tonight. And we usually wait a little time for people to enter the space. But, you know, Neeta's going to have a presentation for us, but we also, you know, it'll be a relatively short presentation, about 20 minutes or so. And as always, we'd love to have questions from the audience, which you can put in the chat, and usually I will ask you to ask your question, and unless of course you prefer that I ask the question. I am Stephanie Grilly. I am a member of the Yale Alumni Association Board of Governors. And it is the Careers Life in Yale Committee of the Board of Governors that works with the Careers Life in Yale area of the Yale Alumni Association. And starting at the beginning of the pandemic, we initiated these Thursday night shows that brought together alumni, featured alumni of various stripes with alumni and also students. Students are also invited to come to the show, and we've had some really great conversations. This particular channel is Lux e Veritas, which of course we know as the Yale motto, and what it's getting at with respect to this programming. I mentioned that we started these programs with the pandemic, and of course the pandemic kind of was, you know, put things on pause and doing a reset in which we kind of examine where we are, where we want to be, and certainly we're well aware that, you know, globally we face a lot of issues, a lot of problems. We're daily beset with the idea of crisis to be addressed. And with Lux e Veritas, we're focusing on alum who are, in a sense, forward moving. That in fact we're looking at those alum who may not have the light and the truth, but are seeking the light and the truth, and perhaps ways out of the particular problems that we all know too well. And so tonight's guest is approaching solutions and social change through art. Our guest tonight is Neeta Verma, and she is Yale MFA 1991. And if you know, have read the blurb as an invite to come here, you know that in addition to being, you know, a professional graphic designer, she's also educator, storyteller, and is currently on the faculty at Notre Dame, where she has a number of affiliations above and beyond strictly the art department. And that gets to the you know, the crux of the focus for what we're going to talk about tonight, and that is social design as a catalyst for change. Neeta, welcome. I would like, I did one programming or one sort of thing that I want to say again. Neeta's going to give a presentation, but after that we welcome and in fact, really encourage you, comments as well. I'm sure perhaps some of you have your own experience, but if you could put your comment or question in the chat, and then I will call on you to ask your question. So Neeta, what is if we're talking about graphic design, and in your presentation of your work, you were talking about the change in society, and also the change of orientation from you as graphic designer, from marketing to perhaps more social concerns. Would you like to set us up for what we're going to be looking at in your presentation?
Thank you, Stephanie. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I really want to thank each and every one of you. Everybody's time is precious, I know. So to engage and be here, is something I just want to thank each one of you for. And I especially want to thank Stephanie for bringing me here. What I'm going to talk about is a little bit of my journey, but also the journey of my discipline. My discipline is pretty young. It started with commercial art, and then it became graphic design, and now it's visual communication design. And it kind of follows, to some extent, let me just approve this. Yeah. So, some of the things I'd like to trace are the historical kind of journeys that this discipline has taken. And obviously, it is highly connected to cultural contexts and socioeconomic contexts. So my journey is kind of trying to find that place where to position my practice and how to kind of define myself and help me define the profession and define my practice. So it's been like a circular kind of journey. Obviously, half my life was lived in India and the other half was lived here from Yale and beyond. So, it's interesting how my two perspectives kind of intersect, all the way coming from a very small town in India. Some of you might recognize it. It's Varanasi, also better known as Banaras, to a design school in India, and then finding out about the faculty at Yale and applying for my graduate school at Yale, and then the rest of it, is New York, and then New Mexico, and now South Bend. So that is kind of, in short, the places where I have been, and hopefully over my presentation, I'll be able to talk about the places where my work has been. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
So, it's design is it's just, I speak, of course, very, it's my point of view. I find it a beautiful discipline in the way it creates futures for not just us, but for our societies. And one of the things I would like to start with is the pluralities of my cultural rooting. And I just want to kind of show you a little, a montage here. One of the things I want to talk about is that the culture that I lived in the later part of my life here in the United States is a very ocular-centric kind of aspect or rendition of that discipline. But when I was growing up, this is what I grew up with. It was not necessarily just visual. As you can see, that it's spatial. It is, defined by smells. It's defined by touch. So there's a, plurality that I want to kind of underscore, that growing up in Banaras allowed me to experience. what I was experiencing at that point was really a visual culture and the plurality of a visual culture. And it's only when I, started going to school that I realized that, there's a difference between the vernacular and the formal. And that, what I was, my ways of knowing were from the vernacular. But I think once I started studying design, I had to understand ways of doing, which was very different. Of course, my ways of being informed my ways of doing, but it was clearly a very different kind of journey. While in one place I was absorbing and taking in the other place, I was almost kind of using all that absorption and putting it out there. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is this kind of shift from, being in the vernacular or the egalitarian to the elitist, and then kind of trying to come back into the society and kind of understanding that how do you kind of re-inform your approach to your practice, your approach to your design. One of the beautiful things about my discipline is that it's ubiquitous. It touches each and every other discipline. It's not knowledge-based, it is process-based. Design is a process. And that's why everybody engages in it. We are not the only people. Yes, we are formally trained, but design as a profession has existed since humans kind of came into being. But my practice, and therefore my practice is predicated by my interest in and interest and focus on social design, which explores the critical use of design as a tool for social equity and justice. So basically my work tries to address more wicked problems and trying to understand how design can kind of help, mediate those. A lot of my inspirations come from, people like Jenny Holzer. And I try through my work, I look at participatory engagement, understanding of social identities through the lens of power and privilege and the examination of power structures. Because one of the things I feel I understand about design is that there's part that addresses the surface, but for design to be truly impactful, it has to go deeper down. And so some of the early work, I put in this poster on the left because I was working for the Yale Philharmonic. But this is some of the work that I was doing while I was practicing in New York. I initially had a long practice, basically working for museums, cultural institutions, and non-for-profit organizations. So you can see this in the center is for the Wildlife Conservation Society. And one of the things when I was working with them, I asked them to expand their message to show people that you were working world over and not just on the Gorilla Project. One of the things I want to talk about is the way this, language started to play such a big role after I came to Yale. And I think in the poster on the right, the Drive Smart, Drive Sober, you can see my starting to, use language in a very forceful kind of way. I went on to work for museums, for the marketing campaigns, but somewhere I kept feeling that I was really still at the surface. I was not really, taking the deep dive into what design can do. And that's when I moved to New Mexico and, looking at it's one of the poorest states. I don't know if you all know it, but it's also one of the most beautiful states that one has ever seen or been in. I hope you all have been there, but if you have not, I would suggest that's one place you should put on your list of things to do. And that's where I started working with grants, because the grants allowed me to do something, not what my client wanted to do, but what I felt was essential. And this was a grant that allowed me to develop a 5-year program for teaching a language, which is Hindi, but in non-immersive environments. One of the ways language acquisition happens is through immersion. But I was teaching children who went back to homes where the language was English. So, trying to understand, how do you build out, how do you design a whole 5-year course that kind of, parallels French and German, but it is delivered under very different circumstances and very different considerations, design considerations. I want to also talk about a little bit about some of the projects that I started then in terms of working with visually impaired in India. So right now, my research happens a lot with the visually impaired in India. There are projects that are going on. This is a project I'm going to show you that just got finished, that not just got finished, it got finished sometime. But then I'm also working locally. I'll share both my projects with you. This was a project where I was trying to understand, how do you create navigation systems or signage systems for the visually impaired? And of course, this is what I'm showing you is what the world looks like to them, and what the world to us, and what the world looks like to them. And the idea that, touch is such a huge part, that their senses, the touch, the sense of touch is like eyes for them, so the reference points that we use visually are the reference points on their fingertips or on their skin. Understanding the idea of role of textures, relief, and the role that both touch and hearing play in the way they respond to their environments. I chose a participatory method, which means that although I am a designer, I'm not designing for somebody, I'm designing with somebody, or having them design with me. And so I started with students who had better eyesight, and they created these motifs. And what we ended up doing is converting some of those motifs into signage systems that were indigenized in terms of their production. The second thing is beads. Different shapes of beads were used to create different textures. What that allowed these students to do is enter the same sign in many ways. And it became a very, not just a sign, but it also became a place where the students would just massage or caress the signs, because that's the way they get information about their the second project, which is more local for me, is looking at mitigating youth violence in South Bend. And the project examines the role of design in addressing a problem like, it's a very complicated problem. So one of the things I wanted to share with you is you can see over here that South Bend really falls off the charts when it comes to youth violence, and the interventions are extremely important to address some of the things. Here are some of the people that I work with. When the problem is huge, or when it's a social problem, then the intersections are several. And as much as design, I think the effort is also to be able to navigate the relationships, because these are relationships before you enter so clearly, we are talking about youth violence. So the direct, the initial part was to, create a program, design a curriculum called the Futuring Project, Audacious Narratives, Enduring Voices. But as my research started to surface, one of the things we felt, the researchers who were working with me and I felt, was that mothers play a very, very crucial role, not just in societies where single parenthood is very, very high, but the way families are kept intact. In marginalized societies where between the rates of incarceration, divorce, or separations, single motherhood is very, very high, and so the lot of the burden comes upon the woman. And one of the things I felt was that if you while we might be talking about youth, it's important to think about women and the role that they play in stitching the social fabric together. And so my premise was that if you heal a mother, you heal a family, you heal a family, you heal a community. And so instead of it being a very linear design framing or problem framing from mitigation to youth, it became mitigation to youth and mothers. And so instead of one workshop, I ended up working on 2 workshops. The first one was the memory project, violence, loss, resilience, and empowerment. It was basically aimed at mothers who had lost a child to gun violence. And the memory project was basically them making blankets with the things that the lost child had left behind for them, and stitching it together with the help of women from the Quilters Guild who helped them. These are women who had never held a needle in there. And so you can see these are some of the really beautiful blankets that have emerged from the and if I may, I'd like to play one of the
My blanket tells the story of children that I lost, that I birthed, and a memory of me that I put inside the blanket of being broken, how my heart was broken and now it's mended, like I mended it back together again. Because I've never been a sewer, and I took great pride in it, and it just made me feel so good that I was actually putting life through something with my hand.
The second project is basically working with the youth. My age range was 14 to 22. And basically, I developed a curriculum at the intersection of art and design, art, design, and technology to help these students kind of find their voices, and be able to express how they felt, what they wanted to say, and how they wanted to kind of. So these are some of the images from the workshop. This is one where they are using GarageBand to create a song. So they build out both the music and the song. Here they have choreographed this whole thing, and now they're watching, in delight what they have put together. These are some of the paintings, and the paintings are really not that great till you kind of superimpose them with what they write about. So there's a lot of not just painting, but also then reflections, because that is where the narratives, the audaciousness of the narrative starts to emerge. And it says, I made this piece to relax my mind and stay calm, also to take my mind off being locked up and to think about my family. So these are some of the ways in which, the students are kind of using these platforms to start to talk about some of these things that are in a way so critical for all of us as individuals. We need to be able to tell our story. We need to for our narrative to be out there. This is someone who wrote, I threw a whole bunch of colors to show what my state of mind is like when I cannot think. And, just very honest, kind of. So this is a poem that one of the students wrote, sad, miss my boy, mad, so gore, my boy face down on the ground, no response, makes my homie sore. So he's talking about the time when he lost his, and he was in front of the body of his friend that he had lost. But being able to translate it into poetry and then to be able to create something out of it. These are some of the things, that I was trying to facilitate through the construction of the workshop. I just want to very quickly talk a little bit, because some of the approaches that I'm talking about that I use in my design practice and my approach to design is something I try to start to inculcate in my students in how they think about. And so this is about visualization of data. I teach it at the intersection of aesthetics, ethics, and politics of representation, which means there's great responsibility that comes when you have the ability to put together a story, because that story is going to define who is included and who's not, right? So there is the idea of, equity in representation. And I'll just play this very quickly. It's about the pandemic and the way the story was being told initially till I'll just try to loop back now to a course that I just taught last summer in India. It's called Pluralities in Visual Cultures. And you'll see some of the, I had 4 sets of students who worked on the evolving Bollywood posters. Another group of posters looked at the Hati Singh temple and the architecture of Jain temple. The third group looked at the jalis in the Indo-Islamic architecture and the way they have kind of affected one another. The Indian artisans have affected the Muslim artisans and vice versa. And then the COVID, the visual culture that has erupted from the COVID. And I'll just play a quick, it all resulted in a exhibition, and I'll just play that very quickly.
दादा नहीं अपना बेटा समझ वो कैंपो खुश हो राज अगर ये तुझे प्यार करती है तो ये पलक के देखेगी तो मैंने कहा दोगे
With that, I'll open it up for questions. One of the things I just want to talk about is I did start with my own journey, but then I went down to the way my practice morphed, but then I came back to the ways in which I'm trying to, through the education and through the opportunity to be in classrooms, I'm trying to help other young aspiring designers to understand how to think about design, how to kind of position themselves. It doesn't have to be like me, but it could be inspirational in the way they choose to go. So
in fact, when we talked on the phone, when we not talked on the phone, when we Zoomed earlier, I said, bringing up, what is the difference between social design and, traditionally what graphic artists have done in terms of public service announcements. And Neeta, what you just presented is a far cry from Smokey the Bear. So in fact, we already do have some questions in the chat, and Is Deborah still here? I'd like to, Deborah, do you want to ask your question?
Hi there, everybody. I'm class of 1984. I was an art history major, and I've spent a lot of time with museums and also work in the for-profit arena and a lot of work in genocide prevention on the nonprofit side or the pro bono side and humanitarian aid and so on. One of the big things that's so important when it comes to social design, I think, is the ability to measure the impact of these various programs. So I'm curious, Neeta, if you can address a little bit about how it is that you might measure the impact of the various very interesting programs that you've been developing all over the world, please.
Thank you, Deborah. I think it's a very, very interesting question. And the way I would answer it is there are two evaluations. One is the short term, and the other is a longitudinal study that you have to be able to do. You know, anything that deals with human experience cannot have a response which is immediate. You know, when you are dealing with inanimate things, when you are dealing with physical things, you know, if you move something, it moves in a certain way, in a predictable way. Human nature is not predictable. And sometimes also what happens is there's latence in the work that you do, that what you do may not take root, it takes seed. And then it flowers maybe, you know, 5 years from now or 1 year from now. So, you know, there is a very big difference. I mean, clearly all these projects have like the immediate or the short-term evaluations and assessments, and then long-term assessments. And with the work that I'm doing with the visually impaired, one of the things that has happened is that the project has now, within that same school, it has grown to other projects. To me, that is one way of assessing and understanding how the project is moving. We are right now at this moment, we are in the process of evaluating these particular the two workshops that I shared with you. And of course, the little clip that I showed to you was out of the set of 7 or 8 questions that were posed to all the participants. What is interesting, Deborah, is that I had 24 people signed up for the memory the memory project workshop. You will not believe it, but there were 5 that finished it. One has to understand that their lives are so complicated that for them, the Maslow, pyramid of needs is very, very different. These things do not necessarily come to play as they do for those of us who are more, you know, that operate within more privileged circumstances. So, you know, was that a failure? I don't know. I think for the 5 that responded, the 5 that, you know, we were able to do, oral histories with, oral documentation with, they talked about it in very strong ways. We did go back to those that had left, but they still, the thing is, they come back to me and say, we still want to do it. The problem is, you know, how do you kind of keep working on something that in a way, you know, those of us who are privileged kind of put a timeline on, right? So I don't know if that answered your question, but in short, I would say that everything has to be assessed, everything has to be evaluated, both in short term and long term.
Well, let me just make one comment, which is to say that I certainly agree with you that it's the challenges that you are addressing are massively complex and complicated. That goes without saying. But by the same token, I mean, if you look in the public or the private sector, years and years ago, John Wanamaker, who had started one of the early department stores in the early 1900s, I guess, or late 1800s in the Philadelphia area, had said, you know, I have a huge marketing budget. I'm wasting half of it, but I don't know which half I'm wasting. And so I don't know if, you know, and one would argue, yeah, they might might be privileged folks who are going to these department stores. But I think in order to spend our money wisely and our resources and get the best impact, and certainly not experience any unintended consequences, which is really a bad thing, that we need to make sure that we measure or we figure out what are our goals with these social design programs. And I would challenge you that I don't think privilege has anything to do with it. I think it's really a matter of figuring out, what are we trying to accomplish? Are we doing it? How are we best addressing these needs for these particular demographics or societies or challenges that we're facing from a social perspective? So I think we're all spending so much time talking about privilege, but some of these are just really fundamental challenges that we face in so many different realms. I don't think it's particular to privilege. I think it's just really, really complicated. And we have to make sure that we bring in diverse groups of people to look at these challenges from an economic perspective, a sociological perspective, a physiological perspective, of mental, emotional, and all of these other things, in order to make sure that we're getting using the grant monies appropriately and so on. So congratulations on the work that you're doing, and please, get some good results so that you can get additional grants. I will let some of the other really interesting questions get answered.
So Deborah, before you go, I just want to say, I do want to push back on the idea of privilege. And the only reason being is because we look at time and resources very differently. They do not see them the same way.
Who's
And
the
that's-
they? Who's
that's-
the they?
The people you're working with, the communities that you're working with, their concept is very different from, and calibrating those and changing those expectations is by far the most important thing. I teach social design, right?
Yeah.
One of the largest things that I do is how I teach my students how to join the conversation, because the way you enter any table or any conversation is what starts the conversation. And that's why when you talk about concepts of equity, when you talk about the playing field must be leveled, that's when conversations start, otherwise they stop. And therefore, I do believe, in my experience over now 7 years teaching social design, tackling things like digital divide or homelessness and poverty and, youth violence, or, right now we are looking at sustainability in Haiti. You have to come to create a table where everybody is equidistant from one another. And that's why I talk about privilege, because I think we cannot, kind of brush it aside.
I
So
was saying from the get-go
Deborah,
yeah.
if you don't mind, we got some, in fact, Neeta, are you okay with sharing your email address?
Oh, absolutely.
I'm sure, I don't want to cut you short, but we've got some other questions, and I'm sure Neeta, this is a great conversation, and people, I think.
Deborah, yeah, I would love to.
You and I agree more than you think we do.
Oh, I think we agree a lot.
So
But I want to sustain it.
Charlie, I want to move on. Charlie is approaching, his question is a little more sort of philosophical orientation. Charlie, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, but I'm nervous. I feel like the speakers before me are much more intellectual.
Oh,
A lot
no,
of that was above my head.
No. I mean, Charlie, your question is, you've laid it out here really well.
I'd like you to read it, please.
Okay.
I'm too nervous. Thank you.
Okay. Charlie says, I'm interested to learn more about the insights and observations you have made regarding human nature through design. I'm curious to know if there are any particular traits or tendencies that you have observed in people when they interact with the various forms of design. And then he thanks you and looks forward to your answer. It's a very intriguing question. I mean, you are talking about this as being not, like a one-way street, that it's, an interaction, and that you can, you know, when you are presenting people with this process and you're presenting, you know, what have you learned about people from doing this work?
Charlie, first of all, I want to really tell you what a beautiful question it is, because if I have to believe what I said earlier, that design is all about human experience, then your question is spot on. Your question is really spot on. And one of the things I really want to say is that we garb ourselves, as we grow, we garb ourselves with so many things. But at the base of it all, we are very much the same. This is something that we have to understand. So what I may want for myself is what I have to want for those that I'm working with or working for or working by through, right? So I think, you know, understanding that, you know, there's a whole section in design that we call empathy, that we teach in very interesting ways. You know, we almost teach it clinically, something that it cannot be done. Right? And yet we try to teach empathy in a very clinical way. It's an important and integral part of design, because again, going back to the fact that it is you redefine human experience. And if you whether you're talking about education or you're giving, take for example the project that I just showed, if you are showing somebody how to use GarageBand, it's going to change the way they respond to narrative making, narrative creation, you know, the ways they mold their voices, the things that they get, you know, they put in their you know, tool belt. So the thing is, design, if we believe that design is about human experience, then it just touches almost every aspect. You know, that's why psychology is such a big part. Sociology is such a big part. Not that we respond as humans and individuals, but also that we respond as societies. And I think that is one thing that you can see about the way a set of people respond and the way they think about design differently in different regions, right? Our socio-economic constructs, our cultural socio-economic constructs, they in a way shape the way we think about design, and that's the way we place it. And I think one can look at Europe, where Europe is going with design, right? The SDGs are coming out of the UN, right? If you look at the programs that are being, you know, policies being connected to design now in such a huge way when you leap just, you know, over to the next continent. But when you go to the Eastern or the global South, there is suddenly a very different way of approaching design. So the point is, I don't know how to answer your question, but I just want to say it's both individual, it's both cultural, it's both social, but it's also very deeply rooted in a cultural socio-economic construct within which, you know, the design goes and resides, whether by the maker or the consumer, regardless of which aspect of design you're looking at. I don't know if I answered your question, Charlie. Please let me know.
You've given me a lot to think about. Thank you.
So Ria, or is it, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it right, has a question that is related to a topic that I think is a matter of concern for a lot of creatives these days. Ria, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your work with us. It is really fascinating, and it's wonderful that you can make such an impact through art. And yeah, I was just curious if you see any avenues that AI might be able to enhance the work that you do, or if there is any particular impacts that you think it might make in the design industry and the types of work that you do.
You are opening up the Pandora's box. But it's such a well-timed question. I just wrote a little paragraph just the other day as a response to, we have put out a grant to NSF to understand how AI can be used in the classroom. to create equity and equitable access to materials. But my question, but the question that was leveled at me, that you are leveling to, is how do you think AI will, impact design, especially visual communication design? The thing is, it's very image making is very integral to what we do. There are two things we use: words and images. So it's AI basically writes for you, chat GTP, and it writes for you, and AI also creates imagery. But I want you to think about the creative process, and my short answer is that it may morph the pipeline that exists within design, but it doesn't make the human redundant. The human still remains prime in the way it's still an assistive technology. It's not a replacement for the human. I still believe that AI is an assistive technology. We have felt that every time, if you look at the history of graphic design or visual communication design, it has been supported on the legs of the technology that has been during that time. So if you look at post-industrial times, you will find that the legs that it has stood on and has been defined by is the technology that has held it up. AI is nothing different from that. And again, if I go back to the process, the creative process, the beginning, the inception of the thing, how do you get GTP to write something? You give prompts. That means a human is starting the prompt making. And then GTP throws out things at you. But then you still use your discernment to decide whether that is something that can be used or not. So if you are bookending the whole process, I would posit that AI is still in an assistive form, which means if it were to eat away at the industry, it would only eat away at the process in the middle, not the beginning, which is the inception, and not the end, which is the result.
That's a really interesting perspective. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's great. Thank you.
So Ria, are you confronting AI in some way in your sphere?
Yes, I work as an economist, and it's interesting. A lot of what economists do is storytelling. Part of it is kind of telling the story of history. But yeah, we're also facing that in terms of kind of what does that mean? But I do think that the human element, like you said, that it's a very good point that where kind of the legs that AI is standing on are still human ones right now. So and at the end of the day, hopefully that continues to be the case, that humans are still guiding it. But it's a good point that you brought up. And thank you so much for your work and taking the time to share your work today.
It's interesting that you refer to yourself as a storyteller, as an economist, and that Neeta refers to herself as a storyteller, as a graphic designer or as a designer. Before I go to chat for another question, in terms of what you presented to us, I mean, there are people attending here who are in different spheres. Can you supply any takeaway for how we can begin to think about visuals and using visuals, not just a PowerPoint, whatever, in terms of what we're communicating or how we want to affect change? How does the imagination play into what may stymie people in terms of moving some initiative for reform forward?
My response to that would be, we have worldviews, right? So we look at the world. It's like the 6 blind men with the elephant. We look at the elephant and we think it's a snake, and we look at the elephant and we think it's a trunk. The point is that we have to, for us to be able to respond to the world in equitable ways, is to step out of ourselves and to join others and to be able to, I want to go to Piaget's concept of the transdisciplinary, because it's a holistic way of looking at something. If you really put together the responses of the 6 blind men, you'll get the elephant. You will not get the tree, which is exactly the point Piaget makes in transdisciplinary work. And that's where design needs to go. Actually, liberal arts, in a way, does that. It stops us from being siloed into graphic designers or economists, as Ria just came on, but to start looking at intersections that allow us to transcend beyond our own disciplinary, spheres.
So, Philip, you put a couple of questions in the chat. You can ask Neeta.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity. I think the first question I'd like to pose is, if an organization has the opportunity, has a communications channel for a social design project, should they think about doing it in-house, or who should they call? And I just want to raise the opportunity in terms of in-house, bringing all their stakeholders together, staff, volunteers, clients, customers, visitors. There may be a real opportunity to really sort of build the collaborative process as you described design. Actually, and I'll just throw the second question out is in terms of adaptability. I guess my experience for many, many years was linear programming. I mean, putting a film in the can, and it was there as a legacy item forever. Wasn't a changeable piece of content. And I'm wondering if design in this era, very fast moving world, could you build in adaptability and morphability, into the design process and product?
So
Can I ask Philip, when you're talking about putting film in the can, what is your background?
So I was a video editor for about 3 decades.
Okay.
Philip, both are beautiful questions. And if I may, I'd like to talk about the first one, the second one. I would like to respond to that one first. So you talk about the ability to adapt and morph. If a thing lives, and if you live, you need to move, you need to morph, you need to adapt. That is the definition of life. That you have to be able to. So movement, adaptation, and morphing are the quintessential ways in which you define life. And for things to live and to sustain, if they do not morph and they do not adapt, they die. And that is so fundamental to not just design. I think it's fundamental to the way we live. And again, going back to the idea that if design is about human experience, we need to understand how to adapt. We need to, the whole definition of learning is change in behavior, right? That is the classic definition of learning. And so we, institutions, humans, organizations, societies, they have to, and they do, and that is why we constantly, one of the reasons as humans, we constantly live with hope is because we are adopting, we are morphing in the hope for a better tomorrow. And that's where design becomes kind of a way of futuring human existence and human experience. So that would be my answer to the first question. The second question, if an organization has the opportunity for social design, I would suggest not doing it DIY. I would suggest getting a designer. And the reason I say that is because as designers, the profession is not dictated by its knowledge base. And therefore, what it does, it kind of almost soaks up the knowledge that is existing in the organization. So what a designer might be able to do is to give you the bird's eye view that is very, very essential. And the higher you go, the more you see, right? So I would suggest that, you should think about asking a designer to help you, think about. I mean, CSR has become a huge thing but that's kind of greenwashing, but there are ways in which it can be done.
Thank you so much.
I'm curious. So we've been talking about graphic design, social design as a force for good. Can in fact it be used as a force for evil?
Absolutely. Design can kill. Bad design can kill. Think about, the kind of cautionary labels that you have. If you can't read them, if you do, I mean, let's not just look at design within, I guess one of the things I might counter question you on is how far are we opening up the definition of design? Are we using it as a noun, or are we using it as a verb? Because when we start using it as a verb, we include disciplines like civil engineering, architecture, and so on and so forth. But even if we had to even take the myopic visual communication design, it has, the ability to hurt.
Well, I was thinking more of, we're talking about design as creating enlightenment, right action, but can it be used to create bad action? Especially, we live in a visual culture, and yet we're not really schooled in reading visual information. Can design be used to coerce? Can design be made to believe in something pernicious?
Yeah, I think you raised such a beautiful, beautiful point. And I'll just take the swastika. I'll take the example of the swastika. You take the swastika and you put it in the Indian context. And it is a symbol of goodwill. It's a symbol of piousness. It's a symbol that the gods are entering your house, etc., etc., etc. That very symbol got transported and got imported by another ideology. It became its hallmark. And what did it do? It changed the minds of young people to believe in something that they may or they may not have wanted to. And we stand here at the doorstep of a human calamity. So, when we think about visual culture, we think it is something, but it can be used as in such devious ways. And I think even if we look at our recent political history, what is going on in India right now, what is happening sometimes over here, it is absolutely hurtful to see how visual imagery is being used as a dog whistle, basically. So we have the ability to take something and make it. Stephanie, you have touched such a raw kind of area in design, because you can take the same thing and make it so benign and so beautiful. And you can take the same thing and make it so evil that the consequences are something that reverberate to date. I mean, if you see, when things are benign, they usually just continue to exist. Whereas, when they are used in terrible ways, they leave us completely shattered as a human race, not just as the people who suffered, but it devastates us. So, design has extreme power, because it can be wisely used and it can be very harshly used.
Well, we're at the top of the hour, and as I promised you, I mean, this is right now gotten very intense, and I'm sure there may be things that you haven't been able to touch upon, and I want to give you the opportunity to address something that maybe you haven't had in terms of what you've shared, and I'm sure everybody here, as Charlie said to you, in answer to his question, that you've given us a lot to think about. So you certainly don't have to speak to us anymore, but I want to give you the opportunity to do so.
I don't know. I just feel that the questions have been so insightful, that they leave me almost thinking afresh some of the many things that I have thought of. In a way, it goes back to the idea of morphing. It goes back to some of the ideas that we have discussed. And I hope these conversations continue. I just feel it's so important. I remember watching Sesame Street when I came to this country in '87 first. And I looked at some of the little clips they were doing, and they were talking about how it all begins with talking, right? And if you remember the famous image on the Sistine Chapel, the two hands meeting, that's what this is all about: how we touch each other, how we influence each other, how we, as much as my words might have affected you, I think some of the things that I read leave me very pensive. And I think that's a beautiful place to kind of leave this conversation off.
Well, thank you, Neeta, and thank everybody. I want to sort of sign us off with something very prosaic after all the poetry and enlightenment that we've been talking about, but basic programming issues. I've mentioned Careers Life in Yale. Every other Thursday we are going to have a program on May 18th, thanks to JC. It's going to be one of the Then and Now shows, which focuses on what's happening currently at Yale, and then what happened many, many years ago, and the subject is going to be the School of Management. The next one after that is going to be on June 8th, and importantly, that one is going to be at noon, because the guest is a graduate school alum in Switzerland. And then after that, there's going to be summer programming, the nature of which it was yet to take shape. And I want to indulge myself in a personal note. I said this has been going on for 3 years. I am now rolling off the Board of Governors, so this is going to be my last Careers Life in Yale show, and I want to say that it has been an incredible privilege in being able to connect with fellow Yaleys, both as guests and as attendees. And I want to give a special shout out to the Careers Life in, I think Robin Mendelsohn is here. She is one of the co-organizers of Luxa Veritas. She has been an absolute delight to work with, and she will continue next year with the programming. I want to thank Steve Bloom, who heads up the Careers Life in Yale initiative at YAA. And I want to give extra special thanks to Chelsea Gadu, who has made everything here possible. And I will continue to hold her in my heart as a friend. And thank you all for coming, and I wish you all well. Good night.